I decided to travel again in New England this time, which just reminded me once again how special autumn was for both of us, but really for Beth. I mean, the color of autumn was in her hair and in her eyes. She had a little bit of green in her eyes, and she had a lot of reds and oranges in her hair, and there's just this amazing beauty to autumn. And there was an amazing beauty to Beth, inside and out. And I see her in everything and everywhere I go. But definitely in the autumn, definitely those colors, definitely that season. I mean, it was her favorite season long before we started dating, but we started dating in the autumn, and she passed away in the autumn. So I guess now I'm probably going to have very mixed feelings about the season, but it's always going to be special to me. I'm always going to see her in the leaves and in the forests. But there's a kind of a tragic quality to autumn, that all this beauty is fleeting, that all the leaves are eventually going to fall off the trees, and the season is going to give way to winter, even before all the leaves have fallen to the ground. Sometimes winter has already hit while the leaves are still in the trees, and it's another kind of beauty to see snow on autumn colors like that. But to me, winter is the season that kills off autumn. I don't, there's got to be a better way to put that, but I mean, I love the snow, sure, but when the snow comes, that means autumn's gonna end, if it hasn't already. And I'm having a hard time in these transitions, a hard time letting go, a hard time moving on, I guess. I'm doing my best to just get through this, to get through this season and then the next season, and kind of try to return to the person I was somehow. I don't know if that's possible, but I'm going to try. That's a clip from my film titled Missing Piece, which I made more than a year ago about and for Beth Broderick. Ever since I was a kid, I was always engaged with art for my whole life, really. Before and after I literally got engaged to my wife. I admit I wasn't great at first. I made this when I just started second grade. I'm glad my mom kept it, even though I think she saved it because she thought it was funny, that if I had an elephant, I would have it do my menial chores like set the table, take out the garbage. I may not have been very good, but I eventually got better, and I always enjoyed it. That is, I enjoyed it until decades later when my wife became sick. Not long after that, I made a deliberate decision to stop making art. I wanted to free up time to be her caretaker, so I walked away from being a practicing artist. She was far more important than art. It actually wasn't that hard to give up. To be honest, it was more challenging to give up meat when I was a vegetarian in college. 8 years into her illness, though, I woke up one morning and she was gone. Think about a life-changing loss you've experienced. It might have been years ago, but for you, it still feels like just the other day. Well, for me, it feels like it was just yesterday, and the devastation is still raw. I spent the next 2 years trying to process her death. I shared images and wrote about her on a blog I called Traveling with Virtual Beth. I traveled with tiny 3D printed spheres I created, with different images on each, and each filled with a small amount of her ashes. I buried them in several dozen countries and multiple continents across the globe. I returned to favorite places that we went on our honeymoon, such as Bath in the United Kingdom. She always wanted to go to Hawaii, so I made sure she made it to Hawaii. And I took her to Iguazu Falls in Argentina because she loved waterfalls, and they were the most extraordinary and extensive waterfalls I knew of. And I took her to Iceland. But I didn't just take her ashes. I also wore her ring wherever I went. I got the diamond when I lived and worked in Africa, although I didn't want her to know I was thinking of proposing to her, so I smuggled it out of Africa in the sole of my shoe. I took her to Machu Picchu in Peru. I think she would have enjoyed that. And I took her to Wales. She loved Wales. It was her favorite place from our honeymoon, and we traveled all over the country. I created a photo series almost by accident. It was a part of my process, but it actually started simply because I was already carrying photos to help identify specific locations to bury her ashes, because I wanted to confirm the places as precisely as possible, and the photos helped me do that. One day, I decided to hold up photos in specific locations, like you might have seen people do with old World War II photos. I'd take new photos to illustrate the passing of time and to show what was missing: her. That act evolved into a film, a clip of which you just saw. And although it's always classified as a documentary film, I refer to it more as a love letter than a documentary. Some images brought back memories that I'd nearly forgotten and created new ones as well. This one was a challenge to get. I'd identified almost every other location in Wales. In fact, it took me weeks of research to pinpoint the castles and the beach where most of these photos were taken. But it was cathartic traveling in Wales. I experienced a rush of memories when I revisited Conway Castle in North Wales, as well as Dolwyddelan Castle, especially this wall fragment where I asked her to pose in this old windowless arch. I love this. I was even invited into a Welsh family's home where I shared the photos with them, and they generously helped me identify some key locations. At one point, I gave up on this image. Each person I asked wasn't sure precisely where it might have been taken. And after I gave up, as I was driving away from the town, I drove over a set of railroad tracks. And in that moment, I realized they must be the same tracks that I could make out in the upper left corner of the photo. From that perspective, I felt certain, maybe foolishly, that I could triangulate the location of that overlook. So I turned the car around and drove back, even though I was already a day behind schedule. And I hiked and hiked, searching for the spot. This image means a lot to me, more than I can really articulate. But really, I could tell long stories about most of the photos I took. Eventually, I reluctantly accepted that I was re-engaged in the art world, which I still struggle with. It felt like the worst trade-off I could have ever imagined. I couldn't give a damn about art, or even the photos, really. I argued with everyone that told me I was making art. I explained it was a healing process, not an art project. And I did not want to reduce her to a simple art project. It kills me to think of her or her death in that way. That first year, I couldn't spend any time in my studio. I wasn't simply unproductive, it was brutally depressing. I was miserable because all I could think about was the only reason I had time to be in the studio was because she was gone.
I loathed it. I couldn't get it out of my mind, and it only made me more angry and depressed. I needed to get away from the studio, and it's one reason I started traveling instead. The images weren't my goal. What was important were the little spheres containing her ashes. They were the heart of everything I was doing, my purpose. Each time I buried some of her ashes, I would say metta for her, a little meditative prayer.
Been traveling all over the world, burying her ashes, saying metta for her. Metta is a kind of prayer that Beth would say for her family, for her friends, for herself, for me. So when I bury her ashes, I say a slightly different form of metta for her, and I give it a kiss every time I say one of them. It's starting to rain. The sky is crying. So I would say, may you dwell in safety. May you be at peace. May you be free from suffering. And may you know my gratitude and love. And I'll bury this here at Glacier National Park. I love you so much.
I'm not really sure just how much I grew from the process, but one thing that affected me more than I expected was the use of social media, where I shared everything. The reactions I received from friends and family were helpful, as were messages from people I'd never met in real life, including the comedian Patton Oswalt, who had recently lost his wife. Some joined me on the journey, offering unconditional love and support, which I appreciate more than I can say. A few criticized me, even unfriended me, cut me completely out of their lives. That felt cruel. And yet others offered advice, though I never asked for advice, only for an ear and a shoulder. If someone needs you to be there, that's all you need to do. Be there. There's no other expectation. There's no need to tell them how to behave. I was told that women grieve, but men suck it up. I was also told I should be commended for being vulnerable, which I never understood, since that felt like a criticism I was showing weakness, rather than simply being open and honest. I'd argue burying things is the escapist option, and confronting pain and loss head-on could be more effective, though I admit it requires great resolve. But I'm not here to convince you that the path I followed is the best way. I'm really not. I'm no expert. And you certainly don't need to be an artist. And besides, that was kind of expensive. Ultimately, to anyone here who suffered a tragic and incomprehensible loss, I'd encourage you to do anything that helps, as long as it doesn't hurt others or yourself. And whatever you decide is the proper way to grieve is the proper way to grieve. And whatever your choices are, they're right for you. And however long it takes for you to process it is the right amount of time. There's no calendar for grief. But you can get through it. I promise you that. I'd acknowledge it can be hard, really hard. But I'd listen to everything you had to say, and I'd be there with you. And I'd offer you the same words, the same metta Beth offered her friends and her family, but also said for herself. And I'd ask you to say metta for significant people in your life, but to say it for yourself as well. May you be happy. May you be healthy. May you be safe. And may you know my gratitude and love. Thank you.